Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Duke, and I will be presenting for you today my Assessment for Learning case study for my Berry College EDU 718 Advanced Academic Assessment course. So first, my intro again. My name is Bryce Duke. I'm a 7th grade social studies teacher at Woodland Middle School in the Bartow County School System in Cartersville, Georgia. And I am part of a PLC Professional Learning Community Collaborative team. So I am a part of a 2-member team. It's myself and my other co-teacher, Miss Sarah Voslovic, who is also in the 7th grade social studies department at Woodland Middle School. And our 7th grade social studies main focus in the standards is over the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. 6th and 7th grade social studies in Georgia are kind of a combined world survey class where they address different areas of the world before moving to 8th grade, which is Georgia history. So in 7th grade social studies involving these three areas, we talk about government, economics, religion and culture, history, and human geography are the main focuses. And for this round of short cycle assessments, we were focused on the religion and culture aspect. And so they were looking at Middle Eastern monotheistic religions. And the three main ones that we're focused on are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, with our main learning intentions being able to identify as well as compare and contrast those three religions to and from one another. So before we could really start with the actual creation of the assessments themselves, we had to examine and reflect on the grading and evaluation practices. So first looking at the purpose for grading. The purpose for grading is we're trying to determine student proficiency on essential standards. In our professional learning community model, we focus on essential standards. We're trying to guarantee that students know the specific standards that we are wanting them to know before they leave the 7th grade. And so in order to do that, we determine a proficiency level. As a social studies department at Woodland Middle School, we collaborate across grade levels in order to do that. And our proficiency level for each assessment is 70% correct. And that is used to determine whether or not they have actually learned the content to a sufficient level. And we determine that percentage based on what the minimum score is to make a 3 score on the Georgia Milestones assessment in 8th grade. But we're trying to work up to allow them to be prepared for that expectation once they get to 8th grade when they're going through 6th and 7th. So it's a vertical effort all the way around. The students' recorded grades that come from each unit are determined by common summative assessment scores, which are after the rounds of short cycle assessments. This is at the end of unit. This is typically what your unit test is going to be. And ideally, students are going to meet proficiency based on formative assessment data predictions. So if they are able to achieve proficiency on each of the formative assessments, if they're made properly and they're aligned to the standards and to the assessment, then they will meet that proficiency level if they meet those. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So students are instead required to meet proficiency on each of the assessments, or they're subject to Tier 2 intervention if they do not meet that proficiency level. So in order to monitor that progress, as teachers, we want to keep up with what their scores are so we can analyze them together as a collaborative team since we're working together. And so we'll analyze that during collaboration with a spreadsheet that we kind of handmade. And then I also input the scores into PowerSchool, the student-managed student information system, so that students and parents can both keep up with that information for independent tracking. So our collaborative team, it's 2 members, myself and Ms. Voslovic, and we meet twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays between 7:30 and 8:10 a.m. during our prescribed collaboration time that's built into our daily schedules as professionals. In our culture, we are very focused on data-driven instruction for all students. We want to we go over our norms and procedures before every meeting, and the 2 main things that we want to focus on is providing data-driven instruction for all students. Focus on the all is capitalized and underlined in our agendas every time, and ensuring that meaningful conversations taking place. So what that looks like, we focus on the 4 guiding questions of PLC. So what do we want the students to know? How do we know they know it? What do we know if they don't know it? And what do we do if they do know it? So we work on our instructional calendar to make sure that we stay on track for our units. We deconstruct standards, we create assessments, we analyze data for every meeting. We work together hand in hand, do lots of things in lockstep with each other so that way we know that we're staying as together as we can, and we're working with fidelity to make sure that the process is maintained and that students are getting the best that we can give them by using data to drive our instruction. So both members of the team work together to make sure that we vet our assessments thoroughly, to make sure that we're using the correct things in order to make sure that students are actually getting standards-based assessments based on the data and based on what we know as professionals. We don't do it alone, however, because we have a vertical collaboration for about 10 to 15 minutes every Friday, which is already built into our meetings as well, where we meet with the 6th and 8th grade teachers, as well as with our school principal, instructional lead teacher, and other special education teachers, so that way we're all working together to use each of our strengths as professionals. We also work with parapros and ESL teachers to assist students with supportive needs. So whether they be read aloud, small group, or students that are English language learners, to make sure that they are also part of that all students that we focus on to make sure they're getting the best that we can give them. And we have a veteran teacher. So Ms. Vosovic has taught this subject for 4 years, and I'm in my first year of 7th grade. So she kind of assumes the leadership role in a sense. However, we still share the workload equally. We work very well together as a team. So when developing our short cycle formative assessments, our standard was SS7G8. So it's to analyze the diverse cultural characteristics of the people who live in Southwest Asia, so the Middle East. And the specific substandard was substandard C, which is to compare and contrast the prominent religions in Southwest Asia, which is the Middle East, which are Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So our learning intention is that each student can identify, compare, and contrast each of those 3 religions from the standard itself. So that's the action or the verb that they need to be able to perform in order to show that they actually are proficient in what we're asking them to do. And the collaborative team, we worked together to build these assessments. We worked over several different sessions to create those assessments. It took us weeks to be able to make sure that we're aligning them properly, make sure that we have questions that are correctly aligned to the standards, that we're showing the students are showing what they know based on the standards and based on the data, and not just us throwing things in for fluff. We chose the question from vetted question banks, so stuff that other teachers had made in the past that had already been vetted, or from a website called Illuminate, which is a learning management system that we use in Bartow County that already has professionally vetted questions, but has DOK levels on them, all that kind of good stuff to help us out and give us more options to be able to bring the best that we can for our students. And we also utilize the teachers from other grade levels. We talk to the 8th and 6th grade teachers that may have different insights or may have caught something that we had missed, as well as our instructional lead teacher for all kinds of help. She's a great resource for us, and we're very glad to be able to use her in our collaboration time whenever she's available. How we administered these assessments. So there were 3 7-question assessments. There were 1 for each of the religions that we had. And it was given on the Socrative.com platform. It allowed for us to quickly see what the data was, to look at it question by question and student by student to determine if there were any things that we missed or things that they had particularly struggled on. And we also created a natural proficiency level. So if 5 of 7 questions were answered correctly, that creates a 71% proficiency score, which is above that 70% threshold. So it makes it easy for us to determine if students have actually met that proficiency. Students with disabilities were also given para support. So they had a small group time. They were pulled out of the regular classroom as per their IEP goals, as well as for read aloud. And our English as second language students, so they're all put into one period. They're in my first period of the day, and I have a full-time ESL teacher that comes and pushes into my class that works with them specifically to help with any kind of test administration needs that they have as individuals. And the data that we were collecting, so the student answer data, obviously, and we wanted to make sure that we got to get a full picture of what each period and what the whole grade level did, but we also would break it down by students with disabilities and their percentages, ESO percentages, and gifted students to determine if they were really getting the material as well. To create our framework for data analysis, we kept the student data on a spreadsheet as we had talked about earlier. And we also were able to look at that data on PowerSchool for students and parents to keep up with that at home so that they could keep track of their learning as well and take ownership of that. They also, as far as addressing the expectation and the feedback, they're already aware at the beginning of the year and before every unit what the expectation is. So 70% is kind of a universal social studies expectation across the board, so it's not something that they're unfamiliar with. So then what would come next after the assessment? So they're already aware of this as well, but we make sure to remember or to remind them that if they're under the 70% threshold on any assessment, then they are subject to go into a focus period with that tier 2 intervention time. and students that don't meet that will get a different intervention activity. And then as well for extension, so if a student scored a 100% proficiency in each or all of the three assessments, then they had opportunity to do an extension activity as well during that same focus period, but they would be in a different setting. And so we also use this data to address teacher effectiveness, to make sure that we're doing the right things in tier 1 extra instruction, to make sure that we're giving them the best, make sure we're giving them the right material, and make sure we're teaching it the right way to address all of their specific learning needs as individual learners. So how do we respond to the data? So students, again, if they did not meet that proficiency level, we'll put in an intervention group, and they were given a reading activity designed to reteach. So there was a reading activity with questions for each of the three religions, and it would be individualized based on which ones that they met and which ones they did not meet on, so they wouldn't have to do a reading activity for subjects that they did meet proficiency on. And those comprehension questions, they had to be completed, and they had to meet a proficiency score that the teacher would check off on to make sure that they understood the material after they were doing the reteaching section, as well as to see if they had gained any kind of literacy comprehension skills. And then once they have passed that, then they have passed out of the intervention period, and they'll be able to get the minimum proficiency score after that on the reassessment. Students that are high achievers, to get them 100%, were given a web quest on the ancient Zoroastrian religion, which is not necessarily one that is still practiced today, but does have many different parallels and comparisons to current monotheistic religions in the Middle East. So it would give them an opportunity to be able to kind of dive into something they maybe had not heard about before and still extend that learning while also still being focused on the standards. And both of these groups were given 2 40-minute focus periods maximum in order to finish that program, so that we can move on to our next units of study and not be dragging along, but make sure we're still focused and ready to go. So in conclusion, after all of the data was collected, students showed very high achievement throughout this assessment cycle. That was a great celebration for us as a collaborative team and as a student body. So the collaborative team together provided 94% proficiency. My students as a whole were 91% proficient combined, which is great. My students with disabilities really had a breakthrough as well, as they met the 70% proficiency goal as well as a whole, which is very good. The big struggle we had was for English. English as a second language students, which were 40% overall, but there were some struggles in there, and as they were addressed here. So with these religions coming from where they are, Hebrew and Arabic terms could often cause some confusion for students that were unfamiliar. This is not English at all, and so we already have students that are struggling with English as well, as it's a second language. So that's going to cause some concern, as well as with Islam. Islam is the least familiar of the three religions for these students, so they're not going to know as much as maybe with Judaism and Christianity, which is a more common religion in the United States. And also, one more thing with Islam is the memorization of the 5 pillars of Islam, which is a main tenet of Islam itself and all of its followers. And it's hard to memorize, especially with the names that they have and all of the different things. And so for the growth opportunity, using the reading activity was a great idea in theory. However, with some of them, if they were struggling readers, it maybe would not have helped them that much, because they're already kind of struggling with reading. And then if they're falling behind, it's going to help them fall more behind. So we need more differentiation options to be truly successful in our intervention for these varied learners. But with that, thank you very much.